through. And real quick too, and this, I wanted to do this tonight to kick off the Faith Next Door curriculum that we're going to be looking at. So, you'll often hear all the religions are basically the same, right? We've all heard that. They just differ on the little things. Well, or they say on the surface, no, I'm getting it backwards. The peripheral beliefs basically is where the religions are the same. When you start to go deeper, that's where religions differ. And those are the things that we're going to be looking at as we go through the rest of this curriculum for the semester. So yes, love your neighbor, don't murder, be fair. This is ethics. This is like how to behave, right? This doesn't address the deeper questions of reality, okay? And all the religions are making truth claims about reality with regard to creation, God, man, Jesus. Is there an afterlife? Okay, things like that. So again, these areas and the ones I pointed out earlier, those are the areas that we're really going to be focusing on for these religions. And hopefully you'll see that they're not all the same. I mean, they may have similar ethical values, but when you get down to the deep core beliefs, they're completely different. All right, so let's look at the origins of Buddhism. Well, like Christianity, Buddhism is traced to a single individual, Siddhartha Gautama. These are the traditional dates. I know there's some scholarly differences of opinion out there. We're going to go with this, 563 to 483 BC. Those are kind of the traditional dates for his life. And there's mixtures of myth and legend mixed in with his life, but we are able to construct a certain historical core of information about him, that tradition, all the traditions typically talk about Siddhartha. So that's what we're going to kind of look at as we go through here. So who was he? Well, he was born into a wealthy Hindu family in present-day Nepal, kind of northern India. And if you look at his life, it can be kind of divided into three periods: enjoyment, inquiry, and enlightenment. So let's look at the enjoyment. By the way, if you have any questions, just raise your hand as we go through. All right, so the enjoyment phase. He was raised in a wealthy family, enjoyed a life of luxury, privilege, prestige, social standing, easy street, okay? His father actually sought to shelter his son from pain, sorrow, suffering of any kind. Okay, they lived in a palace, and his intent was just to keep him inside the palace and not expose him to any of the pains and suffering of the outside world. At 19, some say 16. Again, there's going to be some different, Buddhists themselves don't agree on all of the aspects of his life. We're going to say at 19, Siddhartha married a neighboring princess, and the couple eventually had a son. Now, he seemingly had everything, but he nevertheless grew discontented with his life of affluence and ease. And he wanted to see what was outside the palace walls. I mean, wouldn't you? If you've been trapped inside the palace all your life, don't you want to see what's outside the palace walls? So at age 29, he ventured away from the palace on an impromptu chariot ride. His father didn't know. He just got the chariot, got outside of the palace, and this is where he encountered the four sights. By the way, Buddhism has a lot of numbers, okay? The four sights, the four noble truths, the eightfold path, the three marks of existence, the three poisons. Okay, so you'll hear a lot of numbers, and this is one of them, the four sights. Now, what are the four sights? So if this is Siddhartha on his chariot ride, he encountered four sights that shook him to the core. One was a sick man. One was an old man. One of the sights was a dead man. And he also saw an ascetic monk. Does everyone know what asceticism is?
It's like you remove yourself.
Yeah, it's like it's a life of severe self-discipline and like not partaking of any of the pleasures of the world. And usually the purpose is to find spiritual meaning, like to find a spiritual truth. So you kind of live like a beggar. So anyway, these are the 4 sights that he saw. Old man, diseased man, dead man, and an ascetic monk. So this was his first exposure to any kind of suffering and misery, as tradition says. And it profoundly affected him, and it sparked an endeavor to learn why suffering exists and how it can be stopped. Now, of those sights, the one that had a big impact on him was the monk, because the monk, even though he was an ascetic, he was seemingly living a very harsh life of self-deprivation, he actually seemed kind of peaceful and happy. Okay, so that actually had an effect on Siddhartha. And he resolved to follow his example, that ascetic's example, to seek spiritual knowledge about suffering. Okay, and this is known as the Great Renunciation, because he's going to leave all of his life of luxury behind. He's going to start to live the life of an ascetic monk to find out the meaning of... oh, my thing just went... That's strange. Technical difficulty. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back. It went to some weird screen. So he's going to go on a quest to find the meaning of suffering and the cure for suffering. The causes and the cure. That's what he was determined to find. So he left his wife and his family, all the pleasures of the princely palace, and this is known as the Great Going Forth, because he's leaving the palace and he's going to go out into the world. And his search lasted about 6 years. During that time, he lived a life of austerity and asceticism. Tradition says that he often survived on just a single grain of rice a day. That's hardcore. And he actually grew so weak, apparently, that he nearly drowned once while bathing in a river. Got pulled away by the current, had to grab onto a tree to save his life. Okay. Now, what he found during these 6 years was that asceticism actually was no more revealing about anything in life than his former life of affluence. So he went from one extreme, affluence, to another, asceticism, and he found that, it didn't really help in that sense. So he became, these are some images of Siddhartha during the ascetic period. If you see any of these, you'll know what it's about. So this is when he was kind of bare bones, different depictions of that period in his life. So he became desperate, he became fatigued, and he resolved one day to sit under a fig tree, later known as a Bodhi tree, and he was determined to either find enlightenment or to die of starvation trying. Okay? So he vowed, so he sat under a fig tree in the lotus position. We've all seen those little statues, just like we saw in the lotus position, in meditation, and he vowed to remain in this immovable spot until he either found enlightenment or he died. Tradition says after a period of time, some say 1 night, others say 49, he became enlightened, and he became the Buddha, which means awakened one or enlightened one. Now, what we're going to spend the rest of the lesson going through is what exactly was he awakened to? What was he enlightened about? Okay. Buddhism teaches that he was awakened to a reality that was already there. It's already present, but which had not been perceived. Okay. And that produced the 4 Noble Truths that we're going to go through and the Eightfold Path. I'm sorry, I meant to hand these out. Yeah, just 2 halves, thanks. I'll just hand those around. And he spent the next 45 years after this. So he was about 35 when he attained enlightenment. He spent about the next 45 years until he died when he was roughly 80, teaching these 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and all the tenets of Buddhism. So what are the 4 Noble Truths? First Noble Truth, the true nature of existence is dukkha. Any questions?
What is that?
Ah, yes. What is dukkha? I purposely left it untranslated right now, okay? We're going to come back to that. Second noble truth. Dukkha is rooted in desire or craving, attachment or aversion to things that are ever-changing and impermanent in nature, okay? Impermanence, I wrote some things on the board over here. This idea of impermanence, that things are not ever truly permanent, are not even the same from moment to moment, okay? That is a big concept in Buddhism. You're not the same person you were when you were a kid. You're not the same person you were when you graduated high school. I'm not the same person I was when I started this topic 10 minutes ago because the cells in my body have moved. Some have died, some have come, right? So Buddhism looks at that like that's all transitory. This idea that we're impermanent, okay? We'll get a little more into this as we go through. I know if this is your first exposure to Buddhism, it can be a little mind-hurting. That's why I gave you the notes too, so you can, at least you're seeing it. You can look at it again later afterwards as well. Okay. Third noble truth. Liberation from dukkha comes through eliminating desire, craving, attachment, or aversion to impermanent things. So if you look at these first three truths of Buddhism, the nature of existence is dukkha. Dukkha is caused by desire. If you eliminate desire, you eliminate dukkha. Well, how do you eliminate desire? That's the fourth noble truth. You eliminate desire or craving or attachment or aversion by following the eightfold path, also known as the middle way. The middle way because it's not asceticism and it's not affluence. It's a middle way. And that was the truth that Buddha discovered. Okay, so what's this dukkha? What is it? Let's take a look. It is the foundation of all Buddhist teaching. So if you get your head wrapped around what this is, Buddhist philosophy concepts become much easier to understand, okay? Now, it's often translated as suffering. So all life is suffering. The foundation of life is suffering. That's one way to look at it, but the reason why I left it untranslated is because it doesn't capture the full meaning and essence of what dukkha means in Buddhism. And it can often lead to confusion. So we're going to look a little deeper at that. So one aspect of dukkha is suffering or pain, like we typically think of in the traditional sense. Physical, emotional, mental, like that is a part of dukkha. But it's more than that, okay? And there's two other aspects to dukkha that Buddhism encompasses. One is this idea of impermanence, again, that we just talked about. Everything is transitory. Everything is changing. Everything is impermanent. Okay, so even happiness and pleasure and noble things in life are actually forms of dukkha in Buddhism. Why? Because they don't last. Okay? You're as happy as you've ever been in your life about whatever event. You were happy for that time, but then that time passed, right? So that's how they look at even happy things can be, and that's why it's kind of misleading to say suffering. Like happiness is suffering, that doesn't really make sense. Happiness is dukkha in Buddhism. It's dukkha because it doesn't last and it can't ultimately satisfy. Questions? Okay. It's a lot to take in, I realize. A third aspect of dukkha is this, the idea of conditioned experience. And what that is there's this basic lack of satisfaction pervading all existence. Okay, we're never fully satisfied. And we're dissatisfied in Buddhism. The reason why we are dissatisfied is because we're ignorant. And that's one of the Buddhist concepts too, is ignorance. What are we ignorant about? We're ignorant about the true nature of the interconnectedness of everything, the interdependence of everything. Okay? This differs a little bit from Hinduism. Hinduism would say there's a divine interconnectedness to everything. Buddhism says it's not divine. There's no divine interconnectedness. It's just reality is interconnected. Reality is interdependent without any appeal to any divine essence. Okay, so it's kind of the three aspects of dukkha. If you understand that, I'm sorry, there's a little more on this too. All right, so we're not satisfied. We're ignorant to things that are interdependent and interconnected. So for example, Buddhism denies that we have a permanent or continuous self. We imagine, for example, that the self, or I, that it exists independent from other phenomena. So because everything is interconnected, you're not really you, and I'm not really me as a autonomous creature. Everything is interconnected, okay? So this ignorance, again, we're ignorant about this. This ignorance about our separateness in the world leads us to either attachment, desire or clinging, or aversion and hatred, okay? So one way to think about it is that if I had a hammer and I was getting ready to nail something in, the hammer's in my right hand, the nail's in my left hand. If I go to hit that nail and I accidentally hit my thumb, it's going to hurt. My right hand is going to comfort my thumb. It's going to it's going to just care for it until it's not hurting. Well, if later my left hand decides, I'm going to get even with the right hand, so I'm going to pick up that hammer and I'm going to smash my right hand thumb, okay? That wouldn't make any sense, right? Because I'm all connected. This hand and this hand are all connected. So that's kind of like, that's how Buddhism views reality. Everything is connected. So to say that you are a self that acts independently on the world, that doesn't make sense in Buddhism. You're not. You're all interconnected. You're all interdependent. I know. I see the looks. Yeah, I know. It's, again, this idea of dukkha, once you get that, some of the other things will fall in line. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, what does it mean? I mean, that I'm just giving you the Buddhist, the tenets and the doctrines of Buddhism. But that's the idea, like that hammer example, that's the best I can give, is just that we are all interconnected in that sense, that for us to think that we're separate, the Buddha rejected that idea. He says that that's
pantheism, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of pantheism and monism, that everything is one. So in Hinduism, like everything is one and one is everything, but everything is God. That's Hinduism. But in Buddhism, everything is one and one is everything, but there is no God. There's no divine essence. We're just all part of the ultimate void of reality. Okay?
I was going to ask, like, is it a physical connectedness, or is it some sort of like spiritual connectedness? Like everything is one in a spiritual sense, or every bit of matter influences every other bit of matter?
Yes.
Is both?
My understanding is that it's both. Would you agree?
Well, to my understanding, there are some Buddhists who would say God does exist, but the whole question is irrelevant.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, exactly. We haven't even gotten up to who God is yet. So
this is like a subjective kind of topic even within Buddhism then.
Yeah, when Buddhism branches out into two different, there is a distinction that Devin's talking about there. So maybe your question will be answered then. So we're back to ignorance again. So in Buddhism, these three poisons, ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And so aversion is, so we attach our things to the things we want. And the idea of aversion is we try to avoid the things we don't want. Okay? But again, if everything is connected, it's silly to either want or not want something, because that's all part of our ignorance and illusion and delusion. They often speak of a delusion too, because we're deluded to think that we can want or not want something because we're all connected. Yes?
It says, like, attachment is a poison, then what does it say about, like, two people who, even if they are Buddhist believers, what what if they want to get married? What if they fall in love and want to marry each other? What would it say about that? Are they saying they're evil or they're sinning because they love each other and want to get married? Or what would they say about that?
I really don't know. I mean, that some of these things, and we'll see later, when you take some things out to their logical end, there may be some problems in Buddhism with things like that. And I think there are probably some Buddhist answers, but again, I'm not a Lama or a Buddha or a Bodhisattva that can answer all those things. But your logical mind is in the right direction to even ask those questions. And when we talk about how to engage people, how to engage a Buddhist if you come across any, that'd be a great question to ask them. What you just said, how does love work? If two people want to get married, are you attaching to each other? I mean, that's a great question. I can't answer it because I don't know. But your mind is in the right spot to ask the question.
Well, it probably depends on which form of Buddhism you're part of. I know you're going to get to these divisions, but I think some would say the ones that emphasize, being a monk are going to say this is, attachment. Marriage attachment is not the clearest path. But perhaps others who emphasize compassion might say that this is one way of caring for each other.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, we're doing the kind of, hopefully, the mere Buddhism. I know there are two kind of branches and they have some differing philosophies, but that's a great way just to even think of that issue. Yes?
It says that there's no laws or in Buddhism laid out, and he never spoke against marriage or anything. Like it's just something you can do or not do. It's not really like you have to get married. That's what the internet is saying.
Right, yeah, right. I totally get that. What he's asking is like, well, what if they just wanted to get married? Is that an attachment? And if we're supposed to be trying to rid ourselves of attachment, right? That's the issue. And by the way, these three poisons, as far as Buddhism is concerned, this is what leads to rebirth in Buddhism. They prefer to use the term rebirth as opposed to reincarnation, because if there's no self, then there's not really a reincarnation because there was never really a you in the first place. So they tend to like the term rebirth as opposed to reincarnation because there's not a permanent, continuous self that goes into the next life. And if we remain in ignorance and we stay attached and we stay averted to things, we're not achieving enlightenment in Buddhism. And then if you don't achieve enlightenment or nirvana, that we'll talk about a little bit here in a minute, you are going to be reborn to try to get it right the next time. Okay? All right, so the Four Noble Truths, I know that's a lot to take in. But you've got the handout, and you can certainly do some self-study on your own too. And we'll talk about some ways to engage some Buddhists later as well, if you come across any. But this idea of not being attached to things. There was a poem that was written from an ancient Chinese poet called Li Po. He says, "The birds have vanished into the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains." He's realized everything's interconnected. I'm not really a self. I'm just part of everything else. Okay? So anyway, I saw that poem and I thought it made a lot of sense as far as trying to capture this idea of being detached from the illusion that there is a self. All right, so what about Buddha? Quick pop cultural aside, it's pretty well known that there's a lot of Eastern mysticism themes, Buddhist themes, other types of Eastern religious themes in the Star Wars movies. And a lot of it, foremost, is probably the character of Yoda. So look, this is a quote from one of the Star Wars movie. He says, "Attachment leads to jealousy, the shadow of greed, that is. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose." It's kind of got a Buddhist tenor to it. Another quote from Yoda. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. And by the way, the 3 poisons, I wrote them over there on the board. We talked about ignorance, attachment, and aversion, but you may also see them listed as delusion. We're deluded because we're ignorant. We're deluded about the true nature of reality. Greed or hate. Okay, so those are other ways you may see the 3 poisons listed. So here again, hate leads to suffering in Yoda's world. And actually, there's a website out there too. It's Who Said It? Yoda or Buddha? So you can this one was, that's one we just looked at. Yeah, I came across this during preparing for the lesson, that there's a website that actually you can pick one quote or the other, and guess whose it was. For $30 or so, you can get yourself a little figurine of Yoda in a lotus position. And some say there's actually a Buddhist scholar that claims that George Lucas met this Tibetan Buddhist and he used him as a model for the Yoda. That this guy was actually a debate partner of the Dalai Lama. So when George Lucas was doing a lot of his research, he claims, this scholar, that George Lucas based Yoda on him. And I'm not making this up. I mean, there's a whole article about this, that was Yoda based on this Buddhist master? And this guy says, yes, it was. So anyway, we digress a little bit, but back to the Four Noble Truths. So we got the first 3 truths, right? The nature of existence is dukkha. Dukkha is rooted in desire. We get rid of dukkha if we get rid of desire. But how do we get rid of desire? Well, that's the 4th noble truth. We get rid of desire. We can eliminate it by following the Eightfold Path. And that is the next topic of discussion. So the Eightfold Path is the core of Buddhist practice and lifestyle. This is where you get to doing. Okay? It's not a step-by-step guide. There are 8. It's an eightfold path, but it's not necessarily one follows the other, follows the other. They're all meant to be practiced simultaneously. That's the idea. We're just going to basically mention these. It's beyond the scope of this presentation to get into each one of these, but again, it's a lot of doing. So right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, effort, concentration, and mindfulness. And these are kind of broken down into 3 major areas there. The first 2 being wisdom, the next 3 being morality, and the last 3 being this idea of meditation. To shake off the shackles of ignorance, to come to a true understanding of what reality is, that we're all interconnected, we're all interdependent. Okay, these Eightfold Path, the 8 areas of the Eightfold Path. Sorry. Sorry. Should have turned that off.
I like your ringtone.
So these are designed to shape every aspect of your thoughts, your words, and your deeds. Okay, so this is, again, it's the core of Buddhist practice and lifestyle. You may also sometimes see it, yeah.
So I'm thinking about a lot of times, like me included, we think of Buddhism as a lifestyle, not a religion. How is it connected to more of a religion? When I think religion, I do think like you're following a being or like you follow God.
Yeah. So the question is Buddhism a religion, or is it just a set of practices for life, like a lifestyle, right? There's different ideas about that. I mean, it depends on how you define religion. Like if you say that religion is any view basically that's making claims about how the world really is. So again, in Buddhism, the world is suffering. We're deluded about the true nature of reality. So anything that's making claims about reality, in one sense, can be considered a religion. The fact that, and again, there is an aspect of Buddhism that does allow deities that we're going to talk about. But in one sense, it is just simply a spiritual philosophy too. But, I think, again, we're trying to look at mere Buddhism. You'd have to talk to the person, like a Buddhist that you're engaging with, to kind of get their thoughts on it. But I've seen it both ways. It can be a spiritual philosophy, simply lifestyle. Some of those celebrities we looked at earlier, you know, I don't really know how in depth they're into Buddhism. I mean, you can go deep or you can just be surface, okay? So there's a lot of different aspects to it as well. Does that help? Okay. So I wanted to show this too, the Eightfold Path. If you ever see this wheel, it's often being depicted with the aspects of the Eightfold Path. It's called it got different names. The Buddha wheel, the Buddhist wheel, the Dharma. Dharma is teaching in Buddhism. It goes by a few different names. But I just wanted to show that to you because you may see it in other places. Okay, so these are actually some temples, some Buddhist temples where there's the wheel. Okay, but look, it's also a nice piece of jewelry that people can wear. You can get it on a coffee mug. You can get a tattoo or a cool shirt. Okay, so if you see anybody walking around with that wheel, now you're going to know, maybe you can start a conversation. Maybe they're a Buddhist. Maybe they don't know that it's a Dharma wheel. Who knows? But it's a conversation starter. If you see that kind of symbol, be alert. That's probably somebody who knows maybe something about Buddhism.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that wheel on a sailing vessel somewhere.
Yeah, Gilligan's Island, right? Right. Yeah, well, the idea is, again, it's because they're not necessarily to be followed in, successive order. That's the idea, is that it's all like one, it's all interconnected, like a big wheel, okay? Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I wanted to show that to you. Okay, so the spread of Buddhism. For a couple of centuries after Buddha died, it didn't really spread outside of India. It was about 200 years after he died, there was a king of India. His name was Ashoka. And apparently during a very, very bloody battle, he became just totally distraught and said, this is crazy, all the blood and all the killing. I can't do this anymore. So he became a big advocate of Buddhism, and his idea was to spread Buddhism. So he sent missionaries out past the borders of India to spread Buddhism. Now here's the thing. As Buddhism spread and got into other regions past India and came in contact with other local religions, other belief systems, it kind of blended with some of these, and it gained some new practices. And some of it actually reincorporated some of the aspects of Hinduism, which Buddhism kind of came out of. And this is where we're going to get back to some of these deities in just a minute too. So as it spread, again, it kind of morphed and it incorporated some of these things into Buddhist thought and practice. So Theravada Buddhism. We're going to talk about the two main branches of Buddhism here. This is the earliest form. It strives to adhere to the original teachings of Buddha. As far as enlightenment is concerned, it's only for devout monks, basically, like in the truest sense. There's only one Buddha, not many Buddhas, which the other branch believes there have been many Buddhas. This branch of Buddhism, Theravada, Buddha was only a man. He was not a god. He never made any claims about himself being divine. He was simply a man. Meditation is emphasized, and enlightenment is attained solely through one's own efforts. It's kind of there's a lot more to this, but these are just kind of a way to make distinctions here with Mahayana Buddhism. Now, this one developed around the time of Christ, so a few hundred years after Buddha passed away. They added other texts and sutras. Sutras is just a teaching. They added other texts and sutras to Buddha's teachings. This is one of the main disagreements here. Enlightenment. Is it only for monks, or is it available to everyone? Okay, this is one of the reasons there was an initial split. Mahayana says that it's available to everyone, and that there have been multiple manifestations of the Buddha through history, that there is this Buddha essence out there that we can tap into, okay? They actually look back and they see Buddha as divine, whereas he was just a man over here, okay? So they do incorporate some aspects of divinity and deities in Mahayana. Yeah?
Then, because there's multiple manifestations of the Buddha, does that mean they believe in a progressive revelation of the Buddha as he comes back multiple times?
It's more like people can achieve Buddhahood. It's not necessarily the same essence,
Okay.
but you've become more than a bodhisattva. You become more than, you actually have achieved Buddhahood is the way that I understand it, okay? So whereas meditation is emphasized over here, compassion is emphasized in the Mahayana branch, and enlightenment is attained through the help of bodhisattva. So what's a bodhisattva? This is someone, again in Mahayana teaching, someone who has achieved enlightenment. They kind of make a distinction between enlightenment and nirvana. Okay, so when you achieve nirvana, you understand you're not ignorant anymore about reality, and when you die, you don't get reborn again. You have broken the cycle of rebirth. Okay, that's the goal in Buddhism, is to break that cycle of rebirth. But you don't do that unless you achieve nirvana. So a bodhisattva is someone who has achieved enlightenment, but they refuse to go to, so if enlightenment, it's like you can be in enlightenment and nirvana is the door. You don't actually achieve nirvana until you walk through the door. So these bodhisattvas, they achieve enlightenment, but they don't go to nirvana because they stay behind to help others achieve enlightenment. That's the idea in Mahayana Buddhism. Yeah.
Do they say how you would know when you've achieved this? Because there are certain...
Hold that question till the end. That's you got the right kind of mind for sniffing out some of the things about Buddhism that are good questions to ask. Yeah.
I got a couple things, but the one that first comes to mind is, what's the point of breaking the rebirth cycle? Like, why would it matter? Because once you're gone, say all people break the rebirth cycle, and all have achieved all have achieved nirvana, and there's no more people on the planet. Then what? I mean, what's the goal here? What's the end game? What's the objective? What's the reason?
I mean, it's an individual.
You gotta be enlightened to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's an individual. I mean, for everyone on the planet to achieve it.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Again, Buddhism is typically an individual type of practice. So the idea is for you to break the idea of rebirth, the idea of rebirth, and not to have to come back again. They wouldn't really necessarily be interested in what happens to everyone else after that. So, all right. So there are about worldwide. There are about 500 million Buddhists in the world. Mahayana is the more popular version, about 56%. Almost half of those are in China. I mean, China's big. There's a lot of people there. Okay. Theravada, about 38%. And one that I haven't spoken about yet is Vajrayana, also known as Tibetan Buddhism. Everyone heard of Tibetan Buddhism before? Okay. That's this branch, this Vajrayana. And you probably know Tibetan Buddhism by its most famous advocate, which would be the Dalai Lama. Okay, he's in that branch of Buddhism, and they believe that he's not. We'll clear up a misconception here. He's not the reincarnated Buddha. That's not what they believe. They believe that he is the reincarnated, the 14th reincarnation of a holy monk, or of a 14th century monk that was known as the Bodhisattva of compassion. That's who they believe that the Dalai Lama is. Just so you learn something, if you take nothing else away, know that he's not supposed to be the reincarnated Buddha or the rebirth. Yeah.
I don't like this. It's not like how would you get to that conclusion? Because it's not like he's like, oh, I have memories of it. Like how do you just say? How does everybody look at one person and decide that that person is a reincarnated?
That's a good question. Hold that to the end. Because that's going to be, yeah.
There is a documentary on YouTube about that. I'll try and find it for you. Okay. It's weird, but interesting.
Well, it's probably different because it's like appointed.
Yeah, appointed.
Yeah, you guys are. I mean, you're thinking about the right ideas as far as how to. I mean, these are good questions to ask of possibly someone that you come in contact with. Okay, that is a follower of Buddhism. So how does it play out as far as world religions? It's actually the fourth largest religion. This is a Pew Research poll from 2015. Unaffiliated, when they did this poll, used to be people that don't follow any religions. There are actually 1.2 billion people on the planet. So if we take that out as a religion, Buddhism would be the fourth largest religion, okay? But about 500 million people. Okay. Who is God in Buddhism? Well, the Buddha did not, as Devin was saying earlier, he didn't really consider the matter of God's existence even be important, okay? It wasn't really relevant to the issue of liberation from suffering as far as Buddha was concerned, okay? So you may hear that Buddhism is atheistic. Perhaps. It's more like non-theistic because it doesn't even really, again, it's not relevant as far as Theravada Buddhism is concerned. It didn't really matter because it was irrelevant. Now, Buddhism does not recognize an eternal, supreme, personal, almighty creator deity. That's both branches. They don't acknowledge any kind of creator deity. Yeah. Well, we'll just keep going. And as we said earlier, Theravada Buddhism sees Buddha as only being a man and not a god. Mahayana deifies the Buddha, and they view him as a physical manifestation of this Buddha nature that's out there in reality. Okay, and some sects of Mahayana allow for various deities as well and lesser gods. So, okay, so who is Jesus in Buddhism? Well, all Buddhists of any variety, if they're following true Buddhist doctrine, they would deny that Jesus was divine, number one. They have to account for him because he existed. I mean, he didn't exist when Buddha was around, but I'm saying like modern day Buddhists, they have to, who is Jesus, okay? They look at him now in three ways. They'll say, well, he was an enlightened man, okay? They acknowledge and they respect the fact that Jesus lived a self-sacrificial life. He had compassion on those who were in spiritual need. He was enlightened in that sense. He was a wise teacher. They respect his social teachings, love one's neighbor, demonstrate kindness and forgiveness. They like that. Okay, he was a wise teacher. And they say he was a holy man. He's often revered as a bodhisattva. And as we said, that's one who has attained enlightenment but doesn't go into nirvana, stays behind to help others, okay, through compassion, kindness, forgiveness, things like that. So that's kind of the view of Jesus. I mean, there's probably a lot more that we could go into, but they don't view him as divine. That's the most important thing. Simply a good man, a good teacher, a compassionate person. Who are their prophets? Well, a prophet by definition is one who proclaims the will of God. So if there's no God in Buddhism, they don't recognize a creator deity, so there's no real prophets in the truest sense in Buddhism. They do have the founder that we've already talked about. You have bodhisattvas. Again, they're not prophets, but these are, would be the kind of the spiritual elites. And then there's the Dalai Lama that we just talked about too. Okay, but there's no real prophets in Buddhism. They're sacred texts. Well, Buddhism is not a revealed religion. So the scriptures that it does have, they're not assumed to be revealed or the wisdom of God because there's not a God in that sense. There's no binding authority on their scriptures. There is one key textual authority that we're going to look at here in just a second called the Pali Canon, the Tripitaka. They do utilize that as part of their scripture. But here's the thing with Buddhism. They're not sworn to accept every word of it as literal truth. And in most Buddhism, they just kind of rely on their own insight or the insight of their teachers. Okay? So in addition to who can have enlightenment, is it just for monks or is it for everyone? This was also another issue that kind of caused the split between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, was what are the scriptures? So Theravada, they basically said the canon was closed with this Pali Canon Tripitaka. That's Sanskrit for 3 baskets. What's it comprised of? The Buddha's sermons, rules for monks, and philosophical writings and commentaries. Okay, so when you get to Mahayana, they considered the canon to be open, not closed. So they've added other, as it expanded, they incorporated the writings from Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan sources, things like that. Okay, and these are some of the more famous ones here: Lotus, Heart, Diamond Sutra. Yeah.
Well, who wrote these works? Like, where did they find them?
Well, that's a good question. So Buddha died in 483 BC. The Tripitaka was not actually written in its Pali. Pali is the language of Sri Lanka. It was not actually written down until early in the 1st century. So you got a period of about 400 years or so. 29 AD is one of the dates that I saw in preparing for this lesson as far as when this was actually written down. Now, there could be some oral tradition, of course, but for 400 or 500 years for oral tradition to go on, that's quite a long time. Okay, but nonetheless, what we have finally in 29 AD was this Tripitaka, which has those 3 aspects to it. And then these others, that was even later as Mahayana Buddhism spread. Okay, the view of the afterlife. Well, what comes after this life? Either nirvana, you break the cycle of rebirth, or you get reborn again to try to get it right the next time. I mean, those are kind of the 2 options for Buddhism. This word, samsara, this is the perpetual cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It's the same in Hinduism as well, the same word, and it's the same idea, is that you're born, you die, and you come back, unless you've achieved nirvana. So the way they look at it is that we're trapped. And we're trapped because we're ignorant, right? We're deluded. But we are trapped in this cycle until we can achieve enlightenment and enter nirvana. That's the idea of Buddhism. So like the end goal, if you had to sum it up for Buddhism, we're trapped. We want to achieve enlightenment. We want to escape. It's like being held prisoner here. We want to escape. We want to be liberated from samsara. We want to break the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. That's the idea behind Buddhism. We had to sum it up. Okay. I know this is a lot, so I appreciate you guys hanging with me. So, engaging Buddhists in conversation. There's no real formula for doing this, of course. I would suggest, just as a matter of all spiritual conversations, if you guys have not read Greg Koukl's Tactics, highly recommend this. David Geisler's Conversational Evangelism, 2 awesome books. Can be applied to any spiritual conversation, okay? And some of the things that we're going to look at here just briefly, are from these books as well. But Francis Schaeffer, everyone heard of Francis Schaeffer before? Apologist? Okay. He once said, if I only had an hour to talk to someone, I'd spend the first 55 minutes asking them questions. Okay? And that's not a bad strategy. And that's one of the things also taught in this book is how to ask questions. We don't have to just transmit all of our beliefs. We want to find out people's views and beliefs about what they believe. Okay? So, some strategies, some tips for conversation. If you know any Buddhists, your approach should be gradual. It's unlikely someone's going to change their worldview after one conversation. It could happen, but if you got any friends that are Buddhists, talk to them, ask them questions, buckle in for the long haul. Avoid drawn-out diatribes of comparative religion. Okay, you don't really want to get in that kind of a conversation. When the time is appropriate, we want to communicate the person of Christ, not necessarily Christianity as a religion. Okay, we want to focus on Christ. That's our task, not necessarily to talk about all of Christianity. Avoid overuse of Christian jargon and cliches. Depending on what type of Buddhist you're talking about. If it's a Western Buddhist, they probably have heard some of these things. But if it's an Asian Buddhist, they may not have any sense of biblical concepts, judgment, grace, sin, Heaven, like these are foreign ideas in Buddhism. If you tell a Buddhist, for example, you have to be born again. How do you think they would view that? That's what I'm trying not to do, right? I don't want to be born again. I don't want to be reborn, right? So that's what I mean. Like it can be misconstrued, okay? So just little things like that. Just have to be careful about our terminology. And the more, if you're really interested in this and you have friends and you study Buddhism, it's too much to get into right now. I'm just saying these are things to watch for. Build friendships with any Buddhists you may know. And again, if you really are interested or you got friends that are in Buddhism, learn as much as you can. Educate yourself. But here's the thing. Keep in mind that there are many diverse expressions that all come under the word Buddhism. We've already seen a few. So you got Buddhism by the book, right? But what really matters is, what does the person you're talking to believe? What do they believe? They may not even know some of this stuff we just talked about. So find out their beliefs. I mean, it's good for you to know basic Buddhist ideas, but talk to the person that, find out their beliefs. What do they believe? And when you ask questions, do it with the intent to understand. Listen carefully. Try to learn as much as you can about that person's spiritual views. Make no assumptions and clarify terms. Okay, what do you mean by that? This is one of the, if you've read Tactics, we know that question. What do you mean by that? Clarify terms. How did you come to that conclusion? These are good clarifying questions to ask for someone that you're engaged in conversation with. And don't assume anything, like I said. Okay, so real quick, we should be done here in just a few minutes, if you can hang tight. So engaging in conversation. This is always a good precursor to any question you might ask. It kind of softens the blow, so to speak, instead of just like being an accusatory type question. And this is from, I don't know which one of these books. Either one, probably both. But to start out, it's like, I'm curious to know, and then, well, what are you curious to know? I'm curious to know, how did you become interested in Buddhism? Okay, just some sample questions. I'm curious to know, what is it about Buddhism that appeals to you? I'm curious to know, how long have you been practicing Buddhism? Okay, right? Just some questions like that. That I'm curious to know just kind of softens the question. Do you think it's possible for all religions to be true? Do you think that all religions basically teach the same thing? Okay, you're just kind of probing this person's spiritual beliefs. This is always a good one. What do you think happens when we die? I'm curious to know, right? I'm curious to know, what do you believe to be humanity's core problem? This is going to differ from religion to religion and person to person. How about these? I'm curious to know, have you come to any conclusions about Jesus of Nazareth? It's always a good question to ask. They have to account for him some way. Maybe they have no conclusions. Maybe you can start a conversation. How do you fit Jesus into your religious beliefs? Here's another one. Would you agree? And then some questions. Would you agree that the various religions of the world are making objective truth claims about the nature of reality? The way things really are. We've talked about this in the past. It gets them to think about, it's not just maybe a subjective thing that I've got going on, but like, is it what you believe? Do you believe that's true for reality, for everything out there? Would you agree that if an eternal creator God exists, he would exist for everyone? Or the opposite, if he didn't exist, would he not exist for everyone? Again, we're talking about reality here. If he did exist, would you agree that he would exist for everyone? Okay, these are just some ways to kind of probe their thoughts. And for those of us that know the Kalam cosmological argument, this would be a good one. Would you agree that whatever begins to exist has a cause for its existence? Would you agree that the universe began to exist and that it has a cause of its existence? Now, most Buddhists believe in something called dependent origination, which they believe that nothing comes to be without a cause. Now, one of the problems with Buddhism is a first cause is never really talked about, explained, contemplated, addressed. It's just not part of Buddhist philosophy. They don't really care. They only care about the here and now. They don't really care about how we got here. But again, if we're talking about aspects of reality, maybe they, again, it's something that you can bring up in conversation. You may not care about it, but do you think it's true about reality that it had a cause, that it's not always been here? If Jesus was an enlightened teacher, would you agree that he would be teaching the truth about himself? One last one here. Can you help me understand? Again, just a way to kind of lead into the question without just slamming the question right in someone's face. Can you help me understand? You can say, can you help me understand something I'm confused about? Fill in the blank. Can you help me understand something I'm confused about? Karma, for example, which we didn't really talk about here, but karma is the idea that it determines the type of rebirth that you're going to get in the next life. It's based on your actions in this life. But can you help me understand what evidence is there that rebirth is true? Again, we're asking these questions to understand, because I want to know how someone accounts for this, okay? Not necessarily in an accusatory sense, but, what evidence is there that it's actually true? Can you help me understand with regard to karma, who or what decides whether an act is good or bad? If there's no creator, if there's no deity running things, what's determining that? Okay? Who or what determines the karmic consequences that lead to the type of rebirth a person will experience? And I think someone was onto this earlier. If there's no permanent or transcendent self or soul, who or what moves on from this life to the next? And they have an answer for it. I shouldn't say, I didn't get into this because it's too much detail, but even though we don't have a self necessarily, they say that we're made up of aggregates, that we have a physical body, that we have emotions, we have perceptions, we have volitions, we have our will, and we have a consciousness. Those 5 aggregates, that's what makes us think that we have a self, but they themselves are not actually the self. But regardless, still, what is it that goes from one life to the next, and who's determining that? And same idea of this no self, like what is storing the aspects of this life to the next life? These are some things that I'm genuinely curious about as far as Buddhism is concerned. Someone was asking this earlier too. How do you know if someone is enlightened or is a Buddha? How are we to know that the person we're talking to is actually one of these people? Okay? If there are those in our midst who have actually achieved this level of enlightenment, how are we to identify them? Why should we trust their proclamations? These are good questions to ask. That maybe, right? We don't know. Someone, who was it, was asking that earlier? Oh, Frank. Someone was, yeah. How do we know? How do we know that someone is enlightened? How do we know that they're a bodhisattva? All right, last of all, I know the only reason some of you came here was you wanted to know the difference between skinny Buddha and fat Buddha, right? All this other stuff, we've been waiting for this. Okay. Everyone has seen this, right? In Chinese restaurants, okay? This is not Siddhartha Gautama. This is Siddhartha Gautama. This that you see in the restaurants, just as a curious fact, this is someone called Budai. He was actually a 10th century monk, apparently, that was rather eccentric. He's always laughing, always jolly. He's known as the laughing Buddha. And in Mahayana Buddhism, they believe that at some point at the end of time, in the future, there will be another Buddha that comes, and his name will be Maitreya. And they believe that he is associated with that coming Buddha as well. But I think we will end it there. And since we're out of time, so I'm sorry it went a little long. I appreciate your patience. If you have any questions afterwards, just come up and ask me, I guess, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Thank you.